Welcome. I'm Liza Kirwin, the Interim Director of the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian Institution. And on behalf of the Archives, I thank you for joining us from the East Coast to the West to celebrate the exhibition On the Edge, Los Angeles Art 1970s to 1990s from the Joan and Jack Quinn family collection at the Bakersfield Museum of Art in Bakersfield, California, and surprising connections with collections at the Archives of American Art. This exhibition has been extended to April 2, 2022. So if you're able, please see it. Before presenting our speakers, we're showing a brief video introduction to the exhibition by Rachel McCullah Wainwright, the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Bakersfield Museum of Art.
Early in my career at the museum, I started doing studio visits with a lot of Southern California-based artists. The name was mentioned enough times after meeting with artists like Astrid Preston, Charles Arnoldi, Stephen Douglas, that the name became bookmarked. Joan Quinn was the name. She herself was incredibly involved in the evolution of the LA art scene. She had been documented by artists like Basquiat, David Hockney. She was a colleague and worked with Andy Warhol at Interview magazine. She had this incredible portrait collection done by these artists, but she had also done a lot of work to ensure that these artists who were just starting their careers in the 1960s, 70s, 80s were being promoted. So what the Quinns were doing is anytime one of these artists had an exhibit or an opening at a gallery, they would host dinner. So their homes really became, a hotbed for dialogue between artists, for, conversations. Jack was a prominent attorney in Los Angeles, and he would invite some of his friends who were attorneys, and these ended up being the people who bought the earliest iterations of their work. The Quinns, Joan and Jack's involvement in the art scene is really happening at the same time as the beginning stages of institutionalized art in Los Angeles. The way that we've put this exhibit together, there are so many layers to explore. You have this collector who has personal relationships with so many of these artists. And so when you can see an artist who's done a portrait, you start to reveal a relationship between artist and collector. And you're forced to consider how vital that relationship is to the making of the artist's career. When you go beyond that kind of first level of looking at this exhibit, you're able to look at this pivotal moment in West Coast art making. And when you pull out the collector, there's still so many stories to be told. You have this approach to minimalism that is so different from what was going on the decade prior on the East Coast. There are threads that can be connected to this greater history of art making. And often the thread or the connection that has to be made whenever you're looking at this work is the blatant act of abandoning what has previously been done. And that in itself is, a reaction to the history of art. You have artists on display here that totally recreated what materials could be used to make art, approached art in incredibly abstract and unique ways. And because this work all comes from a single collection, there's also this awareness of how complicated and diverse the art world is, and how many players it takes to make a successful body of work, to make a successful piece of work. And that while Joan herself isn't a traditional artist, how vital she was in the documenting and telling of this story.
Oh, and now I'd like to introduce the curator of the exhibition, Rachel McCullah Wainwright, along with Joan Agajanian Quinn, journalist and collector. She's a second generation Angelino and a 2017 recipient of the prestigious Ellis Island Medal of Honor in recognition of her enduring contributions to both the Armenian and American communities. And her daughter, Amanda Quinn Olivar, who is a trustee of the Archives of American Art and editor-in-chief at Curator magazine. And just to echo Rachel's remarks in her opening video, that the art world is a complicated and diverse place, but also a very personal one, and there are many stories to tell. So I turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Liza, and thank you to the Archives of American Art for hosting this program, and to all of you for joining us. It's been an honor to work with the Quinn Collection and putting together On the Edge. The exhibition would not have been made possible without the generous support of the wonderful company, and we are thrilled to announce that while the exhibition is coming to a close here in Bakersfield, we are going to have a second iteration of the show, which will be opening in June of this year at the Armenian Museum of America in Boston. The 30 years explored in this exhibition are defined by innovation, experimentation, creative freedom, and a spirit of anti-conformity. The selection of work on display is bound to place. Los Angeles plays a key character in this story, but also to the relationships formed there. When examining the period from a historic lens, it's imperative to acknowledge the close-knit nature of the artists, due in part to how small the scene was in LA, but also acknowledge that the collectors were playing a vital role. Joan, I want to start by asking you, do you remember the first relationships formed and really how this collection originated?
I can't talk to the origination of the collection because it was never a collection to us, Rachel. It was more of an accumulation and exploring the art world. And I want to thank the archives, and I want to thank the Bakersfield Museum. And the archives are very dear to me because one of my friends from the Blue Ribbon, Donna Kendall, was an early member of the archives. And I remember so much her going out into the arts community. But I used to work at Desmond's in Los Angeles at the corner of Stalker and Crenshaw Boulevard. And I was in the jewelry department, was the little costume jewelry department, and Billy L. Bankston and Dora Delarios were working in display. So I met both of them at that time. However, I went to junior high school with Dora. So I think we were both, on our summer vacations working at a nearby venue. So Billy and Dora had a really hateful relationship.
But you were only about 17 though.
I know, I was quite young there. I was just, but anyway, so that's how I met Billy. That's how I met Dora. Was from junior high school. Dora was a potter. She was quite an influence, as was my mother, who was born here, and she was very, very talented. I was thinking about it. She used to play violin at school. She was a fabulous seamstress, and I never got any of those qualities.
You have plenty of qualities that we are very happy you have. So do you remember the first piece or is there a piece that you can say this is the origin?
I think I have one of the first pieces. I don't think you've ever seen it.
I haven't. That looks like Dora's work.
1955, Dora. She had a fire after that in her studio, and none of the pieces have survived. I still have this. She gave it to me. So that was kind of the beginning of what we were doing. I was also going to SC at the time, and I would drive from my house down to SC, and I would stop. Somehow I got introduced to Danny LaRue Johnson, who was a very, very prominent in that whole African-American community down by SC. And I would stop at his studio on the way to school, to my class. And I have one of his pieces too that he did early on in the 50s. So that's kind of how I was always accumulating things in the art world, not thinking that it was anything but something from my friends.
Yeah, it's important, I think, to mention Jack. He plays a key role in this figure, and you two were collecting most of this together. Did you always agree? Did there have to be a decision-making process?
Well, then we got married, and then then we got married. Then we started doing things together. We didn't really start collecting this from this group that you're talking about We went to Mexico City with the Nueva Presencia, which was a new movement in Mexico City. And we collected people like Cuevas and Corses and Pedro Friedeberg, who are just now starting to come into their own. But that was like one layer. We would go, we bought like Sister Mary Carita because they would have weekends up at Immaculate Heart. So that was another layer. So it's just started out kind of layer by layer. And he would always defer to my opinion because he was the good one as far as actually making the purchase.
Yeah.
So we would agree on things very much, very much.
Mm-hmm. And I know it was mostly about the friendships that you had and making sure you were surrounded by your friends in your home as well.
Well, the way the friendship started was because my father was promoting races. That's why we came to Bakersfield, because he had promoted races in Sacramento and Oildale, which is in Bakersfield. And so he would travel up and down the state, and we knew the Central Valley. It was very close to our heart. What did you say? Oh, then Billy started racing. Billy started racing, and he was racing his motorcycles, and somehow we reconnected. And so Billy and Kenny Price and would go to the races with us. And that's how that friendship started. Billy was the catalyst. He had Larry Bell came in, Tony Berlant. He introduced us to the young, very young Laddie Dill and Chuck Arnaldi. And we kind of took those boys under our wings.
Yeah, so it really was happenstance. I mean, this all was, the movements are starting and you're just right at the crux of it. And Amanda,
but we're not thinking of it as a movement.
No, but in the museum world, we are at this point.
You were, that was what was so great about what you did.
So Amanda, I would like to ask you, as these stories are being told to me throughout the planning process, I try to put myself in your shoes. I can't imagine growing up in this home surrounded by these people. You have an identical twin, Jennifer, and there are these incredible photos of you with Andy Warhol, David Hockney. What was it like? How did this formulate your view on life? You work now in the arts. How did this contribute to your personality?
Well, hi everybody. And I'm new to the board and very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us to share stories and this exhibition, which Rachel put together so brilliantly. To let you know, I grew up with a mother who had an Instamatic camera in her hand most of the time. And if she didn't, it was given to my father, my sister, or me. We grew up with documenting our lives in one way or another. And everything was saved. She kept everything. And I remember they were both real workers. And I'll just to go back a bit. I remember walking into the kitchen from school. We'd come home and my mother would be sitting there working and stamping the back of the photos to mail out to everyone who was in them so that everyone could have this moment. And my father, in his way, did the same thing. Well, she used those photos for her columns. She interviewed them, the artists, and it was really more about sharing information and promoting as best she could. And again, my father did the same thing in his way in the office. He collected work. He was one of the first people who owned an office to have an art collection. And the idea was to share information, to make sure people knew what was going on, who these artists were. And that was really important. Learning was really important. So I grew up with that. My first interview was with Andy Warhol, and I was about 9 years old. I remember walking into Brentano's bookstore on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. And I had this little silver tape recorder that my mom used for her interviews. I don't know what was said, but I do have a photo. You see? That's because my mother documented everything. So that was really, that that was really part of who we were as a family. As far as anyway.
I remember when you girls, when we used to have a dinner party, you girls, we'd put you to bed, but you'd sit at the top of the steps and listen to everything that was going on.
Now, because this collection is so personal, and this is the largest grouping of work that's been on display from the collection, has it changed at all the way that you viewed the collection since it was installed? I mean, I'm sure even just seeing it in an institutional space instead of in your homes and in your life on a daily basis changes the way that you view it. But what revelations have you had since the exhibition?
One of the revelations is what you brought to the forefront, is that it really fit into the beginnings of these movements that were taking place, because we didn't actually collect, as I said before, with the idea that it was a movement. I mean, we didn't think of it even in academic terms until you put it on the walls and you said, we're going to talk about the different ways these things fit together. Because if we would buy a piece, Moses would come in and put it on the wall, and then maybe Billy Al would come and put another painting up right next to it, and then Ruche would put something up and it would stay there. We would never move it. So it was more about our friends coming in and putting things on our walls for us to enjoy. So the way you brought it out made it an educational situation, which was very appealing. And the more that I go through it with you, the more I see that it's important, even though it's not massive, they're not huge pieces, they're personal pieces.
Yeah, Amanda, do you have anything to add to that? Is there anything you've learned since the show was installed? Or
you put things together in a way that we never saw them.
Yeah,
it was very organic in the way it was placed in our homes. Just like my mom said, it was very friends on the wall, and you really taught us a different sense of it. Yet you kept the same idea, friends on the wall.
The personal feeling is still there to me.
Much so, very much.
And why did you choose Bakersfield? This could have been anywhere in Los Angeles or anywhere in the nation. And
Well, first of all,
I know I had to work really hard to convince you to do this. But
I was going to say, I think you have to take the credit for pushing us into Bakersfield. But because of our connections and because I knew people from the area, and I knew the museum. I had been to Chuck's show and I had been to Laddie's show, and I knew it was intimate. It takes over the whole museum, but it's intimate. And I felt like that was a place, I didn't want anything flamboyant or big museum. And it just was the perfect match.
Well, with that, thank you, Joan. Thank you, Amanda. I would like to invite Matthew Sims to the conversation. Matthew Sims is the Gerald and Bente Buck West Coast Collector for the Archives of American Art Smithsonian Institute. Matthew works with artists and galleries to donate papers, conduct oral interviews for the archives. And we've selected a few objects from the display that he's going to share, objects from the archives collection. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. What a pleasure to join this conversation. And thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Joan and Amanda. So we at the Archives of American Art this is such a natural connection because with the Bakersfield Art Museum, with the Joan and Jack Quinn family collection, because many of the artists represented in the exhibition, in the collection, are artists whose papers we hold at the Archives of American Art. Our ambition is to collect and to preserve and to make available these papers for scholars, for interested individuals, for family members, for those who want to find out more about these artists. So you can see in this admittedly kind of overwhelming list of things here, Billy Al Bangston's papers, for instance. You can see Laddie John Dill's papers. You can see Clara Falkenstein's papers. You can see oral histories, which is another major part of what we do. Lita Albuquerque, Peter Alexander, Dawn Bacardi, all these different interviews that we have. And this is just a sampling, a selection of the holdings we have of West Coast artists. But I hope it shows a little bit of the dedication that the Archives of American Art has to preserving and making available these papers. So what we've decided to do, and this was a collaborative effort, was my colleagues in DC have rifled through and gone into these papers and found little nuggets that relate to you, Joan. And so we're going to try to this is kind of like a gotcha thing because you haven't seen any of these yet. We're going to
No, but this list is amazing because
Incredible.
it's like so what we have. You're just your personal papers.
Yeah. And for me personally, it's been such a pleasure to meet people like Charles Arnaldi, whose papers I was lucky enough to collect myself, but also Billy Al and others as well. So it's true that the personal stories are really, and the connections are really at the foundation of all of this. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide here, which is a work from your collection. And then I think we can look at the next slide just to think of the pieces that are up in the show.
That's in the show.
Right. So works by Billy Al Bankston, who we heard about earlier. You described him as someone who you met early on and also who was involved, interestingly enough, with racing. So if we could see the next slide. So pulled from Billy Al Bankston's papers are this invitation with its envelope here from, it looks like this is to Billy Al Bankston and Miss Penny Little, to his Mildred Avenue address, where I've been before. And this is an invitation to please join us, cocktails, lunch, and a day at the races, Saturday, April 5th, 12 noon, director's room, from Joan and Jack Quinn.
That's kind of the thing we did, Matthew. We would have judges, lawyers, mixed with the artists at a day at the races. In fact, the camera case, Billy used to make fun of me because I carried Louis Vuitton. When we went to Paris, we would always buy a piece and come back. So he made me a camera case and dented it all up. So that's at the museum. But this invitation is very much like the invitation that Paul Rouchet calligraphed, did the calligraphy for, and we took to Cuba and gave to Castro for a party to come to the racetrack.
Amazing.
So that really brings back memories.
And what's great about this is you can see very clearly the stamp. This is March 13th, 1975. So we have a clear sense of when this was posted, when this was going to take place. Do you remember anything about, I don't know, the races? What was the atmosphere like? It
was a very private room at Santa Anita. It was a beautiful room. We took Andy Warhol there. We had, during race season, one of Jack's partners was a director at Santa Anita. So we always had access to that private room upstairs, and they had a beautiful lunch always set out. And the first time we went, Jack and I came to the door and the woman said, "Hello, Mr. Quinn." And Jack looked at her and said, "Barbara?" And I went, "How does he know this woman?" He had gone to Washington High School with her, and she was in charge of the director's room.
Amazing. These stories, again, this was the hope, is that these kinds of artifacts or documents from the archives would have some personal resonance, would perhaps remind you of stories and things like this. I wonder about this little ribbon coming across. Was that just a decorative detail? Who came up with it?
It was a decorative, yes. It was it was a card way ahead of its time. It was really beautifully done. I think, that was the thing. Paul was very artistic, Ed Rouchet's brother, Paul Rouchet. And it was great to have somebody like that do these beautiful invitations. I'm so happy to see it.
Yeah, well,
I don't think I have any.
well, we have it, so you'll know where to find it. And so let's go ahead now. We're going to shift gears a tiny bit, moving to the next slide. This we'll recognize.
Chuck Arnaldi painted my hair blue.
An amazing piece, which relates to to a whole body of work that he was doing at the time with these pieces, kind of these sculptural accumulations of painted sticks, essentially, branches and so forth. We have an interesting set of little diaries that he wrote into that chronicle essentially his daily life across, he donated probably 10 or so of those. And here's one from 1982. He decorated the cover with some of his, brush strokes there. But we're looking here at Saturday, the 20th of March, 1982.
Which happens to be Joan's birthday.
That's right.
And Rachel too. Rachel too. We're both the same day.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. So just what's written here, you can see Joan Quinn birthday, painted little wood piece. Jack and Frank came down to see property next to Brooks, and that's a reference, I believe, to his studio on Brooks or near Brooks down there. I painted B, so we couldn't quite make out what that is, piece. Katie referring to his wife, Katie and I went into town to see art shows, came back and went to Frank's, got them, went to Jones, and we all went to Lisa Specs. Now, we don't know if it's Specs or who that person is they're referring to. We're having
She's
a hard time.
on the board at the Music Center. She was president of the Music Center.
All right, so then that's right. So, and then going there for a drink, then to Mr. Chow's, then back to Quinn's home about 1:30, coked and drunk. So
well, that's very interesting because they were coked and drunk. We were.
That's right.
But we knew Mr. Chow, we knew Michael very well from London because we had spent a lot of time in London together. But that's fabulous diary. I love that.
Yeah. And this, again, the kinds of things that hopefully scholars, as they dig into the archives, as they follow these stories, can learn more and tell the broader, put the pieces together between the artists, the collectors, and ultimately the critics and so forth. Let's take a look at another thing. This is fun. We're kind of like prodding you with little.
Oh, great. Bruce Richards.
That's right. So
I love that.
Can you talk a bit about the context of this? Because we have, if you look at this, and we're going to look at the next slide just to show you how this shows up in our, so we have these two in two different sets of papers, Claire Falkenstein's papers, we have the one on the right, but also Astrid Preston's papers on the left. This image that Bruce Richards made was then used for a card that was when you were retiring from the California Arts Council, I believe, when you were leaving it. So
it was really nice. Bruce made that lithograph for me because I think many people brought gifts when I was going off the Arts Council. We must have had 20 artists at the Hammer Museum where we did the event. And then I asked Bruce if we could make paper. So it was stationery. And I wrote thank you notes to them on his stationery. I can't believe you have those. I forgot I even wrote on those. Those are fantastic.
The note to Astrid says, thank you for being at the meeting. It meant so much to me. I have your letter and my beautiful tree, which you have in quotation marks, which must be a reference to a work of art.
It's a little tree, yes.
Yeah. There will be a new life after the CAC. Thank you and love, Joan. And then for Claire, I think she was not able to come. So you say, I'm so sorry you couldn't be at the meeting. We talked about your piece at the DMV. I hope you are I can't quite make out what that word is.
Recovering.
Recovering, right. Okay, Amanda and I miss you, love, Joan.
But we got Claire Falkenstein commissioned for the Los Angeles DMV, and no one wanted to give it to her because it was like a woman. And we went, no, we went through the panel and we decided that she did the whole facade. It was fantastic, downtown LA. And Claire came over to the house and drew me. I think, Rachel, do you have those drawings
Yep.
too?
Yep, they're in the hallway.
Yeah, they're in the hallway. But she was very important to me. And
Mm.
I'm glad that she got that. We stood up for her and got that.
Yeah,
She was wonderful. She was incredible. And I remember going to her studio so many times and park on Speedway and go in through the garage into her workroom, where she would do the welding and set up and then go through into a courtyard with this huge tree and up these stairs into her beautiful, huge studio that was above her house that looked over onto the boardwalk. And it was really, we used to visit all the time. It was wonderful. She was wonderful.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I was appointed to the Arts Council in Sacramento by Willie Brown, who was the Speaker of the Assembly at that time. And I was the longest sitting member. And I hope that I brought the arts. I had a hard fight because I loved art in public building, art in public spaces. And this thing with Claire was in a public space, in a public building. And I fought very hard on that committee because I thought it was important to bring art into the community.
Yeah. My other job is teaching at Cal State Long Beach. And in front of that university, there's a big, beautiful Claire Falkenstein. First thing I saw when I arrived on the campus, and I knew they had something good going. So
I'm glad it's still there because, the one on Wilshire Boulevard, that gorgeous fountain was destroyed.
Oh, yeah, ours is intact. It's not on currently, but it has been in the past. Now,
we have to protect those things, Matthew.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, this piece is from your collection, and it involves the melting of the glass. And I think we have a couple photographs from the Falkenstein papers as well, showing some of the process.
Oh, wow. Those are great.
Mm.
You are surprising me.
Good. Good surprises. So, well, shall we, I believe, I'm trying to remember, I think we have another surprise for you in here. Oh, a couple.
Oh, that's great.
So you'll recognize on the left a piece from your collection. This is Astrid Preston's Freeway from 1984, but this on the right is a sketchbook that she donated. She's someone who I collected her papers, and I remember going to visit her and having wonderful conversations in front of her art, and really zeroing in on drawing as something that she really wanted to give quite a bit of that to us, drawings and sketchbooks. And so this one is in in her papers at the Archives of American Art, and it relates, we believe, quite clearly to this painting that you have.
Very, very much so. I've never seen that drawing. The drawing is fantastic. It's really beautiful. It has such movement to it. Yeah. But talk about the size of this, Rachel, because everything that Astrid did was small. We always had small pieces.
Yeah, and this is an early work of Astrid's, and she's just starting to deal with representational subject matter again, and you can really see it, celebration of Los Angeles light and space, a combination of reality and kind of metaphor of the landscape. Very poetic, as Astrid's paintings always are, but large in scale, especially for this time period.
And I know Astrid, you're out there watching. Hello.
Hi, Astrid. We all love you.
Astrid's wonderful. It's such a pleasure to know her. What I love about this comparison here is that you see now, by looking at the drawing, that there's something odd going on with this upper overpass, that seems to disappear into a cloud or something, as if it was painted and then painted out. And you can actually see in the drawing that perhaps that did continue.
Yeah, I think that there's an ominous nature to a lot of her work, and you found that.
And in this also, you can see how the format switches. So for the painting, it's vertical. For the drawing, you can just imagine her sort of sitting perhaps with this on her lap. She turns the sketchbook, horizontally so she can get that sweep. But then when it comes to the painting, she says, no, I want the vertical.
Tightened.
I want that sort of upward movement. So
one day, let's have a conversation and ask her.
Yes, we could. And let's take a look at the next slide to see another Right. So this is moving on now to obviously Carlos Almaraz and Elsa Flores.
Oh,
And this is a photograph from their papers, which we have as well. And we wanted to show you on the next slide that there's, if we could have the next slide, please. There we go. So a piece of their
Oh.
collection. So I don't know if you know, but what we have in the papers is this painted photo Xerox. So she made Xeroxes and then she painted it. And this we found, and we're still generating context and thinking through how this relates. But I didn't know if you were aware that there were.
No, I want that. I want that. I love the looseness. It's so loose. I love the way. I remember she came to my patio and I sat on a bench and had a mantilla on. She actually organized the whole thing. She had some palm leaves there, which are those shoots going out. And she actually posed me like that. She had something in mind. And Carlos was one of the people on the Arts Commission that I was able to get a really important commission for. He sat on a lot of artist committees for us too, with Magoo and some of the other people that he would bring into the arts.
That's so amazing to hear you say that there's a palm frond behind you, because now I see it. But before I was thinking they were stylized light,
Right.
you know, but I can see it's meant to be light, but it's a palm frond as well.
And
So
then the mantilla, she had that, but I can see it more in the piece you have, where it comes all the way down.
comes right down, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Mhm.
Wow.
We love Elsa too.
Mhm.
Well, just a few examples of things that connect this wonderful collection to the archives. And of course, we're so happy that Amanda has joined the board of the archives. And so this connection has just gotten stronger.
Yeah.
So am I. I'm really thrilled that she's on there. She has so much to add.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Matthew, so much for giving us that insight to the archives collection and really enriching what we have on display here at the museum. We now have a couple minutes for question and answer. If anybody does have a question, please drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The first question we have is from Bess Petlick, and she wants to know if the exhibition is going to be shown in Los Angeles at any point.
Well, Beth, we hope you can bring it here. We don't have any plans yet. We'd love it.
Yeah, at this point, you know, we are scheduled at the Armenian Museum of America, and that will be on display through the beginning of 2023, it looks like. But there are some other potential host institutions that we are working with. So hopefully it will continue to live, and we'd love to have it back on the West Coast. Second question, Dawn Moore asks Joan, how did you avoid, I'm going to say, partying with this crowd? It was a wild crowd. I think it's a reference to Chuck's coked and drunk statement.
Hello, Dawn. I just sat down the other day. She's a really old good friend. I thought she was going to ask me how I got my hair coloring, because she knew Zandra Rose, and she knew that we went to London a lot, and that Zandra, the dress designer Zandra Rhodes, was also an artist and influenced my natural hair coloring. But my mother was very, very strict with us, Dawn, and we really never got into drinking and drugging. And I don't know, it was kind of like a very conservative background. We didn't oppose it, but we just weren't a part of it.
And really, it was the same for us.
Very strict with you.
Very strict parents, Armenian strict, taught my father to be strict. And it's the same generationally down.
Good, Amanda. I'm glad to hear that.
Joan, how Meltzler asks, do you still accumulate?
Hal Meltzer in the desert. We love Hal. We met Hal when he was in Berlin. Not as much. We can't accumulate as much as we used to. It's very difficult to think about everything we have and adding to it. We have had some pieces of Hell, who is a really fine artist too.
An anonymous attendee today wants to know if there was a type of work that Jack gravitated towards.
Jack loved the boys. Jack was very fond of everything Moses did and Bob Graham did and Billy Al. And as I said, the Larry Bell, Tony Berlant, he loved Tony's work. All of those people were great friends, and they were not in competition, which I think was very West Coast, not East Coast at the time.
We
And
can
they
add
all-
to that Joe Fay, Woods Davy,
Right.
a whole, and they all played tennis together. This was a big tennis.
We did
village.
play tennis together up at my father's house. So that was also
Very
another
familial.
meeting point, very, very close. Then we'd have breakfast with my family at the house. But he liked all of that work. And, you know, it was that kind of thing. It was the boys club, which we weren't a part of. We always were inclusive, but they all worked in different medias. So nobody was in competition till now, maybe.
But my dad was also a huge, it was in that respect, yes, the boys club, but he was a huge supporter generally of women. There was no discrimination. I was raised in a you can do whatever and you can do in everything kind of household, because there are strong women, there are, everybody has a strength and or has this strength. So there was nothing, you know, he got women into the California Club. He fought so hard for that. So yes, it is the boys club with this, because those are the guys in the art.
But it was the boys club at that time, Amanda. It was that group.
Yes, exactly. But
Yeah, well, I remember
a little about Dad.
at the opening, Claudia Perducci had a great story about Jack, so she was very supported by him as well.
He was very,
Joan, how were you introduced to Astrid Preston? Do you recall?
Oh, you're going to ask me things I can't remember. Can we ask Astrid? I can't
We'll have
answer
to get
anything.
back
I
to
don't
that.
remember so many things. I've met so many wonderful people, and they've all been a part of my life for so long. It's hard to go back and say, how was it? I mean, my kids have been a part of my life forever. And how was it when they were born? I do remember them, you know, it's hard.
Yeah, but there could be a mix up there somewhere.
Oh, no, when my identical twins. Hi, Jennifer, are you watching?
One final question. I want who were the women working at this time? That did come through.
Lita,
Judy,
Chicago, Linda Banglis,
Via Selmans.
Who else, Amanda? I said Lita Albuquerque, right? Helen Pashkin.
Gwen Murrell.
Gwen, very close. Linda, Gwen, Nancy. They were all friends. They were all close, but they were like not in the boys club.
Linda was. I think Linda was a bit more on
Linda
that.
and Via, but Via was very close to Tony. Linda was very close, but they weren't considered like part of that group.
And well, and Tony Berlant, I don't know, he's family as well.
I know.
Very
Peter Alexander, right?
Kenny and Happy Price. I remember going to
Mary Corse was brought up in the chat as well.
Right.
We used to go to Billy Al's house for parties when we were little. And I remember going to Kenny and Happy's as well, because they lived in the same building in Venice.
Yeah.
And this was normal, and they weren't crazy parties to the kids. You know, all of the kids were running around, and it was familial. And you know, Bob Graham was our godfather. Stephen Graham, who's a constant in our lives, is the godfather to the kid, to my nieces. This is our life, and I'm so thankful for it, really, and thankful to be here with all of you, especially now.
I want to thank you all for this event and thank Rachel for your work on the exhibition, and especially to Joan and Amanda for sharing so many of these wonderful stories and the friendships that you had with so many artists. And we're thrilled to have this opportunity to learn more about the exhibition and your collection and the memories that are evoked by photographs and diary entries and party invitations and sketchbooks and other items that are part of the history of art that are at the Archives of American Art. And I just want to remind everybody that the exhibition at the Bakersfield Museum of Art will be up until April 2, and will be opening on the East Coast at the Armenian Museum of America in Boston in June 2022, and that will remain up through 2023. And we also welcome you to the Archives of American Art to visit us online and in Washington, D.C. And we're so pleased that Amanda is a member of our Board of Trustees and for bringing us all together for this event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for all my friends from the Cedars Art Commission are on. Phyllis Kylan from New York. I see everybody in the chat. So thank you everyone for watching.
Great. And Joan, Martha Fleischman wants to know about your buttons.
Oh, these are buttons from the museum. It's the Billy L portrait of Jack and me. Amanda had the buttons made for kind of the insiders. We're happy to give them to you when you're with us.
How great.
We take them off and give them to you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.